Major General Christopher Beck took command of the Maneuver Support Center of Excellence this summer. Major General Michael Talley has commanded the Medical Center of Excellence since September of 22, and Brigadier General Stephen Allen is the Commandant of the Ordnance School, and he's here representing the Sustainment COE. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us here today. We'll start this panel with remarks from Major General Beck. Sir, over to you.
I appreciate it. First of all, definitely want to thank Major General Buzzard and the entire MCoE team for a great event. Really appreciate the dialogue. As was said, my name is Chris Beck, and I have the honor to command the Maneuver Support Center of Excellence at Fort Leonard Wood, where we're the proponent for protection, obscuration, and I have the honor to work with three great commandants from the Engineer School, the MP School, and the Seaburn School. So you've heard a couple folks today say, hey, I've got a couple bosses or I've got multiple bosses. All right, so let's count the number of senior leaders and leaders in general that have used the term protection over the last 2 days. Yeah, there's some people that want some input into what I'm looking at. But that really shows the big impetus behind protection. As we've talked at the Maneuver Support Center of Excellence, we don't own protection, we synchronize protection. And it really does, as General Beagle started with earlier today on the topic he was discussing, it really starts with what's the definition? Because we've all heard the term protection thrown around. We've all heard it discussed. We've all heard it used. It's kind of like convergence. Everybody throws it at the end of the sentence because it's in our doctrine, but nobody's really sure what it means. And so there's really three areas I would challenge you to think about when you hear the term protection. And the first is preserve critical capabilities. Those are friendly capabilities. The second is deny enemy freedom of action. And the third is enable access in depth. And if you think about that, there's still a framework I want to describe really quickly from a protection perspective. And we've talked a lot about driving change toward the Army of 2030 and how we will fight. And I agree with what General Buzzard said earlier with the mindset change that we've all got to have. But I really want to reinforce a key point that a lot of senior leaders mentioned, and that was we will fight at echelon. And so I want you to think about protection in a similar means. And so there's really three buckets that I'll describe to you when it comes to protection to try and simplify or demystify some of the protection and the use of that word. And the first is what I call the institutional protection, and that's really driven by AR 525-2, which is entitled Army Protection. But that's largely the policy aspect of protection. It's driven by the Provost Marshal General at Headquarters DA and really talks about the 16 pillars of protection. And those are all important. Those are very important. And they're just as important to warfighters, but they're not what I would consider the warfighting function itself. The two buckets are the two areas that I would use to describe the warfighting function. The first is foundational. And that's the one I really want to focus on with a lot of this audience. So again, this has been repeated multiple times. You heard the Sergeant Major of the Army and multiple leaders talk about being brilliant at the basics. So foundational protection is really everything we've been talking about for the last day and a half. It's camouflage, it's dispersion, it's digging in, it's properly moving and maneuvering. General Bernabe is not here any longer, but one of the things that he said coming out of Warfighter 23-4 was, yep, you maneuver to fire, but you also maneuver to protect. And so those are the key aspects, and those are really center to what a lot of you will be doing as company commanders or platoon leaders or senior leaders in those or leaders in those organizations when you depart MCoE. And the final bucket is really where I'm trying to have division and corps commanders focus, and it's what I'm calling the operational bucket of protection. And that bucket really centers on, it's the exact opposite of targeting, which is trying to get the bullet to go out. Protection, we're trying to keep you safe from the bullet coming in. And operational protection is the synchronization of multi-domain capabilities to create convergence opportunities. So it really is that multi-domain capability, that exquisite capability that really elevates the echelon. And the last thing I want to highlight as I talk about protection is I really want to demystify or demyth a couple things that a lot of folks will say about protection. The first is it's only in the rear area. That's the only place we worry about protection, which couldn't be further from the truth. As I talked about particularly foundational and operational protection, those are the depth and the breadth of the battlefield. It doesn't matter where you are in the battlefield. If you're not thinking about those things, you're not going to be able to do the first imperative, which is preserve key capabilities. The second is really there's no such thing as persistent protection. You'll have a lot of things, and a lot of you probably saw the graphic on General Eisenhower's slide earlier today that showed the different bubbles. And that's a great graphic presentation, but there's no such thing as persistent protection. You have to think about protection all the time throughout the breadth and depth of the battlefield. And the last thing really ties into that, and you'll hear the term PPL, or Prioritized Protection List. And anytime someone brings you a PPL that is static, we're going to protect this asset, we're going to protect the Q-36 radar, we're going to protect the DSA, you need to raise a flag very quickly. Because just like targeting, that's got to be a dynamic, activity, critical event driven list. Because there is no such thing as persistent protection, your protection team has to think about that PPL throughout the depth and breadth of the battlefield and through time and space. So those are things I would challenge you to think about. And when you look across the .mil PF, as we look to 2030 and beyond, you heard mention this morning of things like a protection brigade, FDU. As we look to really ensure that that capability, which is currently filled by our maneuver enhancement brigades in Compo 2 and 3, is resident in the corps and divisions so that they can help synchronize protection across the different avenues that support that requirement. Now I want to walk down a couple of our other branches that we work at the Maneuver Support Center and really highlight that through a couple of the key requirements. The first is the wet gap crossing, which I know you're all familiar with. You've all trained on it. You've all done that in school here. But the reality is that was one of the 18 large-scale combat operation gaps that was highlighted years ago through CAC, and it's one that we haven't completely addressed yet. So as you look at our current capabilities today, we do not have enough float bridge capability. A lot of our tactical bridging with AVLBs and the jabs is either on an M60 chassis or an M1 chassis. So in some cases, it can't necessarily keep up with the maneuver forces. And so it's a challenge. And then you look at our fixed bridging or our Lock B bridging. That's not mobile in many cases. It requires a large lift and it requires time to get in place. So those are all things that you as commanders and at echelon need to consider. And as we move through the future with those capabilities, we're certainly looking at human-machine interaction and how we can leverage robotics to deliver a lot of those capabilities. But at the end of the day, those are going to be a large lift in many cases. And so what does that mean to you all? That means you need to think about things like, how do I secure existing crossing sites? What recon elements do I send out and what are they looking for? How do I use deception at the lowest tactical level to enable success of a wet gap crossing? Because it's pretty obvious, and we've seen this in the Ukraine, you don't hide that all that well. But that's also something we're working as we look at obscuration. And one of the things that we're focused on is multi-domain obscuration, because as my peers on this panel will discuss and previous panels have already discussed, everything we do is interrelated across the COEs, and that doesn't change when we look at multi-domain capabilities. Before I go to the enablers, I want to skip down to the obstacles as it relates largely to the engineers. And we do have an emerging gap, and that is a gap in mindset, in training, and capability. So, and the engineer commandant is actually here with me today, so he'll correct me if I say this wrong, but I'll quote him. You've all heard of FASTCAM, and what that doesn't mean is field artillery delivered scatterable mines. It means family of scatterable mines. And the point there is you all have capabilities at the brigade and below level that you have to ensure you understand and use. You all, I know, have gone through General Buzzard's leadership, engagement area development. That's something that is near and dear to our heart at Maneuver Support as well. And it's something that we have really atrophied on over the last 20 years. So we've got to get back to that. You've got to learn how to leverage your key enablers in that engagement area development. And one of the big ones is those terrain shaping obstacles, because we don't often have the COFMs required for the maneuver. You've heard a lot of discussion about range and magazine depth, and those terrain shaping obstacles, both deep, mid, and close, will allow you to engage the enemy and defeat the enemy more thoroughly. So that's something we're continuing to work on as we look at the Army of 2030 and beyond. Again, we're looking at how do we leverage human-machine interaction, robotics. All of those capabilities that we're looking to develop have on, off, on capabilities. They can be remotely delivered, and we're going to continue to leverage that so that it enables you as a maneuver commander to shape the terrain successfully to fight the enemy where you want to fight them. And lastly, as we look across the board on key enablers, some things you need to keep in mind. So a lot of the enabler force, at least the maneuver support element, A lot of our vehicles aren't necessarily the most recent fielded. We've got a lot of our engineers still in 113s. Again, it's a reality. We're working through it, but it's something you've got to remember as you look at how am I moving my combined arms team up to the breach, up to the wet gap crossing, or on the obstacle in general. And I'll highlight a couple things with the MPs and the CBRN capabilities. So the MPs, not a whole lot of capability at the brigade and below level, and it'll likely decrease even further as we move to the R-Struck and when that's approved. But that's a key economy of force capability. You're all going to have to deal with detainees on the battlefield. And what we want to do is we want to ensure that we can put as many shooters, as many maneuver elements forward to fight the enemy. So that MP capability that we do have at the higher echelons as it's pulled out of brigades and pushed to higher echelons is critically important as an economy of force, whether it's in the Corps or Division rear or whether it's doing detainee operations to enable the maximum maneuver forces forward. And then something I'd challenge all of you with when it comes to CBRN. So for a lot of years, we haven't trained CBRN. The biggest thing you did when you went to Iraq or Afghanistan was decide whether you put your mask in your bag or not. Well, that's not how we're going to fight in a LSCO environment. And so I would challenge all of you as you train at the company level, as you train at the battalion level and the brigade level, you've got to get used to fighting dirty. One of the other LSCO gaps was large area decon. And we're working through it, but we don't have a good solution yet, whether it's a formation or a capability. And so you'll have assets at your level, you'll have kits, you'll have PPE. You've got to be sure that you train in that, you're proficient with it, and again, it gets back to the basics or the foundational protection I talked about. So as we look to the future, we continue to move toward human-machine integration and roboticizing as many capabilities, pushing sensors out further forward, whether they're terrain shaping capabilities or whether they're CBRN capabilities or a combination thereof. But that's what we're looking at moving forward to enable maneuver success throughout the depth and breadth of the battlefield. So I look forward to your questions.
Okay. Hey, thanks, General Beck. Hey, I'm Major General Mike Talley. I have the privilege of commanding your Army Medical Center of Excellence. And at the Medical Center of Excellence, we train about 32,000 doctors, nurses, specialty corps officers, veterinarians, medical service corps officers, the whole host of medical AOCs and specialties come through the Medical Center of Excellence. When you think about your medical profession, each and every one of them have to meet a higher standard. They have to be licensed. They have to be the very best at what they can be. And so when you're looking at certainly the Army qualifications that they have, it begins certainly with the national standard. And I tell you, just couldn't be prouder to have them or have them as part of your team. And the integration that we have right now with maneuver, I don't think it's ever been better. So I want to thank General Curtis Buzzard for putting on certainly this conference and having this panel going forward. I want to give you a little context, though. And we have spent the last day and a half or so. We've talked about maneuver. We have talked about LSCO. And we've talked about the effects that we're going to be able to bring to bear on our enemies and future conflict. What we haven't talked about is the fact that the character of warfare is changing, but the nature of warfare will not. That means that in large-scale combat operations, it means probably more casualties than we've ever seen during engagements than we've seen in the last 20 years of sustained combat operations. We'd have to go back probably to World War II to envision the amounts of casualties that we're talking about. We are well integrated right now in Ukraine. I just had a team come back of lessons learned folks, and as we look at how the warfare is being prosecuted, the types of casualties and the amounts that are occurring, it is significantly different than what we've become accustomed to. We've become accustomed to, young soldiers hit by an IED. Within a golden hour, they're typically transported to a level of care that saves their life, a forward resuscitative surgical team, a combat support hospital. As soon as we can get them out of theater, they're at Landstuhl and they're talking to mom and dad. Mom, dad, hey, I've been hit by an IED. I'm going to be okay, and I'll see you at Walter Reed in about a day. Well, in large-scale combat operations, it may not go that quickly. That golden hour may turn into a golden day or a golden week. And certainly being able to treat the way we have in a quick fashion, the way we have, it may not be possible. the need for prolonged field care, the need to have capabilities far forward so that we can maintain the fight and maintain momentum is going to be essential. So we have three imperatives that absolutely have to happen if we're going to sustain our nation's wars in the future. We've got to be able to clear the battlefield. We have to be able to return to duty the wounded as quickly as we can, those that can return. And oh, by the way, we have to overcome contested logistics. Those three things they've got to happen in large-scale combat operations, and they certainly won't be easy. It'll present a great number of challenges. I think the graphic up here, it kind of shows the centerpiece of what we're having to do to transform at the Medical Center of Excellence. And it's going to begin with the Army's second largest MOS. That's our 68 whiskey. Right now, your 68 whiskeys graduate. They're EMTB baseline certified. They can manage at the emergency EMT level, and they are capable certainly of providing immediate care when needed. And it's worked well, I think, in COE, where they've had to be able to do enough to sustain life within the first few minutes. As long as we got them back to definitive care in that golden hour, we're going to be okay. And that was good enough. Well, if we're talking large-scale combat operations and prolonged field care, they may not be able to get our soldiers back to that definitive level care as quickly as they need to. And they may have to stay on the X a lot longer with perhaps less capability, but they have to have significantly more know-how going into it. So medics of the future are going to have to be baseline registered paramedic qualified. And that's going to be, I think, especially important when you're talking about the Guard and Reserve, who comprise 68% of the medical force structure. They have to be able to maintain their skill sets on the outside. They'll be able to do that certainly with a baseline registered paramedic qualification. It's not just about having the accreditation, though. It's the skills that they're going to need, and we're watching that in Ukraine right now. Ukrainian soldiers who, they're in their 17th month of conflict right now, the amount of DNBI that we're seeing right now with Ukrainian wounded as well as Russian wounded is the #1 cause of our wounded right now. And so the need to be more proficient with not just disease, non-battle injury, the behavioral health toll that it's taken right now on Ukrainians, et cetera. The need to be able to apply more kit if we need to our medics. And we can build all the kit we want. We can use things that we use in our operating rooms right now, condense it, ruggedize it, get it to the front lines to sustain life. But if those medics don't understand the physiology, they don't understand that, hey, if I put a ventilator on you, it's going to have an effect on the kidneys, we're not going to be able to sustain life the way we have. Certainly not to the success we've had in the last 20 years of combat. So the way we're implementing this, the pilot for the Army right now is the SFAC. And the SFAC beginning this fall, they'll all medics that are part of the SFAC will be given a 3-POP identifier, and they will achieve that baseline fundamental skill set for the Army. They will show the conventional forces what that takes. Frankly, I think that's going to be the easy part of our task ahead as we deliver the Army for 2030. What's most important is how do you sustain the skill set? How do you make sure that the reps and sets are being achieved once they graduate, once they're part of your formations? And if they're not being proficient, they're not practicing their craft, just like if we're going to tank gunnery or we're doing things in live fire just to maintain our proficiency, it's all going to be for naught. And so using Mystics, our medical simulation training centers at home station, I view Mystics as a training range. And all Mystics in the Army, whether they're active component or National Guard, are not the same. You go to Fort Cavazos, it's a state-of-the-art Mystic that really puts you in the combat zone when you're going there. TCCC, the tactical combat training skills that medics are going to need in the future are there. That's the way they're going to be maintained, and certainly those of you that are here, leaders that are going to be taking companies, and certainly the brigade commanders that are here, it's imperative that your medical teams maintain that level of proficiency going forward. Just some of the other .MIL-PF types of initiatives we're taking on at the Medical Center of Excellence, and that's probably the portion that takes up most of our time as COE commanding generals, and that's that whole synchronization piece of .MIL-PF. Yep, the training and education piece is a large part of it, but the majority is spent certainly on the .MIL-PF domains. And with the Army Medical Center of Excellence, we're the proponent certainly for all of the medical doctrine in the Army, the 4.02, that's our Army Health System doctrine, the hospitalization doctrine, evacuation, detainee operations, all of that. We are also the lead for the joint doctrine. The way we will conduct casualty operations in the future, if you think about Indo-PACOM, that archipelago region, and if you think about our continuum of care, going from a company aid post, a casualty collection point, roll 1, roll 2, roll 3, et cetera, that may be distributed where, guess what, roll 2 may be on a Navy vessel. Your roll 3 care may come from a host nation hospital or some others. So writing the joint doctrine has been especially beneficial in making sure that, hey, we are at least getting it right in doctrine. The communications pieces, some of the other things we are having to work out are done through training. They're done through repetitions. Exercises like Talisman Sabre that just concluded in Indo-PACOM. We found a number of gaps, certainly, that are out there. And if you notice from the 17 LSCO gaps, not one of them has anything to do with casualty evacuation or treatment. I think that's about to change. We found from the most recent warfighter, after experiencing 21,000 casualties in 7 days, we are probably not where we need to be in 2030. We're going to have to be certainly much more effective at how we clear the battlefield, how we return soldiers to duty, how we sustain momentum. Non-standard casualty evacuation is something that we haven't had to do to the scale that we're going to need to do. And I'll tell you, I think my colleague talked about his 36 rotations at the training centers. I've got 32. And I've been at NTC as an OC as well as JRTC in lots of rotations. And I will tell you, and not to tell another that back when I was a lieutenant or whatever, or a captain, but we were pretty good at it as an Army. We did RTEPs. That was first sergeant business when it came to clearing the battlefield at the company level. And thanks to COIN, where we've had the luxury of having that golden hour, redundant evacuation rings with our CASEVAC and our medevac systems, we haven't practiced it to the degree, perhaps, that we're going to need to in large-scale combat operations. It'll take everyone to clear the battlefield as quickly as we can when we think about the scale that we're talking about. 21,000 casualties in a core warfight. I want you to just think about that and digest it for a minute. We haven't spent a lot of time talking about that here. That's the reality, though. How do you keep going? How do you sustain momentum if truly those are the estimates that are at hand? That's going to be important. As we turn toward the division as a unit of action, we are looking real hard at inserting a Roll 3 formation inside of divisions. As I mentioned, if we can get a wounded soldier who is, blunt trauma, penetrating wounds, if we can get them back to definitive care as quickly as we can, the chances of survival are greatly increased. So with divisions, and you heard my cyber colleague talk about the signal emissions that are given off. Think about a combat support hospital. This isn't just an ungrounded generator, but the amount of equipment, the amount of kit that would go into that would emit a signal would quickly give away the position. And if you've ever been around a combat support hospital or a field hospital, and you've seen one set up, it takes about 7 to 10 acres. That's not going to work in LSCO. It's got to be mobile. I'm getting my folks to think about ways to execute Roll 3 differently. You may not be able to operate in a complete hospital configuration. Your surgical capability and your ICU may have to work together. And guess what? The other portions of it may be a couple terrain features away. If we put it on wheels, we can move it at times, kind of like the pictures depict it. The Estonians are doing that right now with their Roll 2s. I did that as a company commander, 3rd ACR with Expando vans. So we're thinking differently. It's not about certainly what the structure looks like, how much space it takes up, but no kidding, what are we going to need to keep the fight going? You're going to count on that, certainly, and when we look at why we've been successful the last 20-plus years of combat, when I talk to certainly my colleagues that are combat arms, a lot of it was the confidence in knowing, you know what, I feel good about what I'm doing because if I do get wounded, if I do get hurt, my chances of survival are pretty doggone great. We can't lose that. We have to provide the capabilities that are needed. That's both with emerging technologies, but a lot of that is going to start with us. It's going to start with certainly managing casualty evacuation in a non-standard fashion. It's going to be without certainly medical experts that are right there at point of injury. If we don't stop the bleeding and do what we need to in that first minute, the golden hour won't matter. And so a higher level of training proficiency across the board are things we're looking at. Perhaps a higher level of combat lifesavers as well. Rangers right now have a typo low titer program that they're using in their formations, and many of those Rangers are qualified at a baseline first responder level. That's the way we have to think going forward, certainly. For leader development at the schoolhouse, we're recalibrating every single one of our courses. And we have about 190 courses altogether, functional courses. Our PME is conducted at the Medical Center of Excellence. So that recalibration has to do with LSCO, the scenarios that are in their training, and certainly the preparation that goes into it with our healthcare providers. Again, we can't count on the way the system has been the last 20-plus years of combat. It'd be much more austere and certainly much more violent than we've experienced, and those are the things that we're working on certainly most prevalently. I'm going to stop there because hopefully that tees up, I think, the right discussion. But I think the key takeaway is knowing that at echelon, within your various maneuver formations, it's imperative that you include those that are going to be responsible for saving lives out there. It starts with certainly our non-standard providers, starts with an IFAC kit, knowing how to use everything that's inside of it. And then certainly, incorporating and folding in your medical platoon leaders, your medics that are on the ground so that they can incorporate, do their job, and be where they need to be when needed going forward. So I look forward to your questions, and again, thanks for the panel.
All right. Thank you, Major General Beck, Major General Talley. I'll provide you reinforcing fires on some of the topics you just mentioned. Good afternoon, everybody. As mentioned, I'm Brigadier General Stephen Allen, Commandant of the U.S. Army Ordnance School. Here for Major General Simley, the Commander of Sustainment Center of Excellence, which makes up Quartermaster, Transportation, AG, Finance, Ordnance, and of course, Army Sustainment University, which trains over 50 different military occupational specialties. So on my slide, I'm going to start from upper left and just work around. The operational environment in 2030 will be much different from what we know today. As envisioned in the current version of FM 3.0, updated last October, most notably, while the division will be a unit of action, the battlefield will be much more dispersed. While not dominating the air and maritime domains certainly presents obstacles to sustainment, contested space and cyber domains will have equal, if not greater, implications on how U.S. forces operate in the future. The 21st century continues to witness rapid evolution of military tactics. Technological advancements and proliferation of conventional and improvised munitions, along with the proliferation of military and commercial unmanned aerial systems with sophisticated sensors and weapons, threaten our use of critical terrain and infrastructure. Terrestrial, aerial, and space capabilities impact a sustainment unit's ability to conceal themselves, and the speed of detecting, identifying, and targeting forces makes frequent moves both challenging and ineffective. Sustainment forces cannot adequately perform required missions while in constant movement. Even relatively short halts within the enemy's fire's range can result in catastrophic losses. Sustainment forces are seen as vulnerable, immobile, observable, predictable, and yet highly critical to units' ability to defeat enemy forces. If practical, threat forces will likely incur some level of risk to significantly degrade a unit's sustainment. So what are we doing about it? The Combined Arms Support Command, with support from Army Futures Command Sustainment Battle Lab, are conducting a series of experiments and exercises as part of Sustainment Multi-Domain Operations Campaign of Learning. This campaign will help us to reshape doctrine, training, and leader development across the enterprise in the months and years ahead, as well as potentially influence some material solutions that end up in our tactical logistics formations in 2030. Within the change in maneuver, the Army of 2030 is making the largest change in Army organizational design in the last 60 years. This transformation creates a more division-centric Army, which means changes from our vehicles to the way we fight. This requires all sustainment formations to adapt, to be tailored with new designs and modernized equipment. With the division now being the unit of action, there are new concepts of operation, new material integration, new designs to organizations, extended lines of communication, and the need of forward thinking of sustainment through contested environments. Through the Army's modernization efforts, we are pushing to deliver sustainment in 2030 while designing sustainment for the Army of 2040. We will do this through decision dominance, demand reduction, advanced power, maritime operations, and autonomous distribution, as we look at how the Army will achieve multimodal, multi-domain, autonomous distribution to provide long-range dispersed resupply in a contested environment involving manned and unmanned platforms capable of operating in air, land, sea, space domains with low observable characteristics. Distribution also needs to be autonomous between launch and recovery, able to communicate and navigate jointly as part of a combined force in an anti-access, area denial environment to achieve a resilient and redundant supply distribution network. In the upper right, you'll see the Joint Tactical Autonomous Aerial Resupply System. This addresses three gaps to help assure the velocity, endurance, reach, and the precision sustainment required during multi-domain operations. This unmanned aerial resupply mobility platform enables semi-independent IBCT operations through employment in tactical situation when time, terrain, weather, or other priors inhibit traditional methods of resupply. The JTARS extends the fight by enabling delivery of critical supplies to the forward edge without requiring large hangars or special facilities for the maintenance and storage. Additional benefits include lightening the soldier load, providing maneuver commanders with an unmanned organic sustainment asset to put the right supplies at the right place at the right time in the fight. Shrinking supply chains to facilitate maneuver op tempo. Mitigating risk to expensive manned, ground, and aviation assets and crews. And as a reminder, the JTARS capability is still in development. In addition to experimenting and developing modernization strategy for our sustainment, over the past year, we experimented with fighting the brigade support area and fighting the division support area tabletop exercises. We will continue with fighting the core support area tabletop exercise in the spring of 2024. A recap of fighting the BSA. The purpose of fighting the BSA was to determine how to organize and operate the BSA to improve survivability while providing effective support to brigade operations during large-scale combat operations. Key insights include the BSB may employ 2 or more support nodes to achieve dispersion, creating longer lines of communication and increased complexity during sustainment operations. Sustainment mission command networks require the capacity to operate disconnected, generating greater resiliency to harness data as a decisive commodity. Against a pure adversary, sensing capabilities will complicate the BSB's ability to avoid detection. There is limited time and space to hide. Large-scale combat operations requires BSB commanders to exercise increased authority and control over the employment of forward support company assets and activities in support of BCT operations, to include co-locating the Field Trains Command Post within the BSA and/or BSB-controlled support nodes. Within fighting the DSA, a few items. The purpose of fighting the DSA was to determine how effectively can the Division Sustainment Brigade of 2030 support dispersed units through disaggregated distribution during LSCO despite the effects of degraded communications, all while ensuring sustainment can provide prolonged endurance, operational reach, and freedom of action. Key insights include: we confirmed the requirement for divisions to have the capability to maintain 3 days of supply to enable the division's freedom of action, operational reach, and prolonged endurance. The loss of 3 functional brigade support battalions, either through force design changes or enemy action, have a negative compounding effect across the lateral brigades within the division. Sustainment TOEs do not support a realistic and feasible PACE plan. Sustainment units only have the P in that PACE plan. As mentioned, the division has requirement for above Role 2 capability with increased evacuation capability. The Army must train command and support relationships to define and better understand the synchronization and the integration of medical capabilities within the division's critical paths. At Echelon, there is doctrinal shortfall in who is holding non-unit replacement and return to duty personnel prior to their movement to support units to facilitate reorganization. As a process, who is the Army's proponent for reconstitution? Moving down to our culture of maintenance. In order to overcome some of these gaps in readiness, we must establish a maintenance culture that begins with individual knowledge, proficiency, and management of equipment. The only way to win in LSCO is to prioritize the right personnel, equipment, and materials to ensure there is solid connectivity between vehicle crews, squads, and logistic teams. This comes down to training soldiers to ensure that they have the right skills, having no more gap between supply and demand and maintenance management. Within data-centric and leader skills, predictive logistics is at the heart of this ultimate vision where we secure readiness of the force with skilled data technicians who can predict maintenance and replacement prior to the need. The predictive maintenance process requires skilled data soldiers who can read, analyze, and visualize the data from equipment sensors into actionable insights that can be used to improve the Army's equipment management. In closing, all that and more is how the Sustainment Center of Excellence trains, educates, and develops adaptive sustainment professionals for the total force, while generating, synchronizing, and integrating innovative Army and joint sustainment. I'd like to make sure that everybody's aware that the TACOM commander is here, Brigadier General Layler, and my Command Sergeant Major is here in the audience for anybody that has questions on our 24 specialties, ranging from 89 Bravos to 14 series. I look forward to your questions, and thank you for your support. I'll turn it back over to you.
Gentlemen, thank you for those comments. And I'm just going to jump straight over to the app here, just based off the amount of time we have left here, probably time for 1 or 2 questions. And first question, I'm going to compile several that are coming in, and for General Talley, this goes to you. A lot of questions about casualty rates in LSCO and how we'll manage MSCOE situations. 2 components to it. One, a transformation, modernization component. What do you see as some of the tactical medical capabilities that we're going to deliver down to the brigade level and below? And then how do we train for that component of LSCO, the mass casualty component?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the questions. A few of the materiel solutions that we're working on, certainly. The need for blood products at point of injury is going to be essential. And so using freeze-dried plasma, for example, something that is FDA approved in France, but not necessarily in the United States. We have the EUA approval. So that is something that we are using right now in the special ops community, but something that we're certainly advancing in expediting with the FDA approval for that. but the training that goes along with that, the use of blood products, the use of using the human blood bank, if you will, similar to the fashion that the Rangers are right now, identifying those in the units that have type O, low titer, an aspect of blood that makes it universal to be able to transfer is going to be a game changer when you're talking about not being able to evacuate a casualty going forward. One of the formations that we're looking at, if we're talking about prolonged field care or the need to have that, is a prolonged care augmentation detachment. And these are 4-person teams that will be able to supplement the base support medical companies, and not necessarily giving greater holding capacity. Right now, doctrinally, a Charlie Med is designed to hold about 40 casualties at a time. If you think about LSCOE, the need to continue moving, it becomes imperative to transport the casualties to a higher level of care, or have higher level of care come and get them, which is the doctrinally correct way to do it, before we can move forward. But the prolonged care augmentation attachment will supplement the Charlie Med so that it'll have higher technical capability for individuals that will come in and certainly be able to apply a greater level of medical skill sets for the Charlie Med company right there. They'll also be able to operate a higher level of equipment. I'd mentioned ventilators as an example if the need for prolonged field care is there. So the experimentation that's going along with the PCAD, if you will, that's been continuous. But the plan is in place. O&O has been approved, and we're moving full out to conduct those. Just from a very fundamental training perspective, if you think about the way we've used DIME in the past 20 years, and that's our triage categories: delayed, immediate, minimal, and then the E is expected. And I will tell you, when we are training 68 whiskeys right now at our schoolhouse, that's a pretty, it gets pretty emotional sometimes. When you're talking to a young 19-year-old, just with simulated casualties, making decisions about who they're going to be able to treat and who they're not going to be able to treat. So when you're looking at just the ability to conduct triage, when you don't have all of the enablers there, that's something that goes beyond certainly just training. That's a leader development aspect. That's a cultural change that we absolutely have to endure. But with preparing for MSCOE, we have got to do a better job certainly training for it, preparing for it. I think General Beagle talked about putting more rigor into CTCs. And as a medical OC at both CTCs, I knew full well that the amount of time that it would take to treat casualties wasn't always executed. You're not going to hit the same training objectives that you need to for a brigade if you are actually spending the amount of time it would take to treat the wounded. So typically the ROE was focused more on the amount of time it would take to get to each level of care. From there, that would through adjudication, it would determine whether or not you had a return to duty or you could end the casualty play. I think with the onset of the new miles equipment, we're going to be able to have better training at other training platforms for EAB units. For example, if we actually have casualties where we have to stop casualty play at roll 2, I think we all know the casualty would have to continue to go through the continuum of care. But if we had miles that could actually transfer the same data to another set of miles at a training center where we had EAB formations training, we could actually, I think, increase the rigor and account for the real BDA that would go along with casualty play. So it's going to happen at home station. We have to get darn good at it. One thing Hal Moore that stood out to me is that he never got satisfied with certain tasks. And he would train his unit to the point where they were just cursing him. But he did it for a reason, and I'm sure it made a difference at LZ X-ray. We have got to be ruthless at casualty evacuation and the tasks that go along at echelon, platoon level, company, et cetera. And then practice it in collective training events, and then that needs to get to the CTCs and better integration, certainly at our war fighters. That's all forthcoming, and we've got to get better at it, quite frankly.
Sure, thank you so much for that answer. This will be our last question, and this goes to Major General Beck. It pertains to combined arms breaching. We've seen a lot of challenges with combined arms breaching operations in the Ukrainian conflict on both sides. This is one of the key mission sets that we instruct on and train with here in MCCC and really in our two bullocks as well. When you look towards transformation, what are some of the capabilities that you see us bringing online to alleviate some of the challenges with that mission?
No, thanks for the question. And the first thing I'd like to talk about is the combined arms breach now, today. And I would challenge all of you out there. There are two key considerations that I think you all need to keep in mind regardless of echelon. And number one is training. You've got to train that ruthlessly, as my peers have said, for many different topics, and that's got to be combined arms training. A lot of the engineers, as we move to 2030 and beyond, are going to move outside of the BCTs. All of them will. So you've got to fight to do that combined arms training, because you've got to remember that whether it's a wet gap crossing or a complex breach, the objective is not the obstacle. The objective is not the wet gap. It's beyond those. So you've got to do that combined arms training, and you've got to get it good. And the last thing I would challenge you with on those two things, or that combined arms breaching, is understanding the time. As I've been through not 32 or 36 rotations, but quite a few rotations to the TTCs at all levels, I've gotten the opportunity to see the lack of appreciation we have for the time that combined arms breach takes, which tells me we didn't train it effectively at home station, and it really takes a lot more of the combined arms effort over time, whether it's obscuration and smoke from your field artillery, or whether it's security and dispersion of the combat forces. That time it takes to do the combined arms breach, you don't really appreciate it till you do it. And so I've seen a lot of that, really a misunderstanding of that time aspect. And then as we look to the future, those are great lessons we're learning through Ukraine right now. Our breaching systems, particularly our MCoE, is very outdated, both on the capability to get it to the fight, as well as the explosives capability of the system itself. Those are two key areas that we're working at with the engineer school to not only deliver it through remote capabilities or robotic capabilities, but then also how do we improve the detonation, the explosives, to ensure that we clear an effective lane for our maneuver forces. And that gets to breaching in general. And we're trying hard to not only, whether it's mechanical breaching, whether it's things like MCoE, whether it's mines and rollers on our future combat systems, or whether it's some other type of system in the future. We're not where we need to be with breaching right now, but with what we have, again, we've got to train it, and we've got to appreciate the time factor associated with it. So thank you for that question.
Sure, thanks. And gentlemen, thank you so much for your time today on this panel and your insightful discussion there and your insights on where your organizations are going. Ladies and gentlemen, if we could please give them a round of applause.